Yesterday, we stopped at this paragraph. How should we decide how far we should go in Buddhism? In early Buddhism, we can use a single stroke to decide. That single stroke involves reverting to direct experience as the ultimate basis for judgment. This is one of the distinctive features of the Buddha's teaching, is the respect it accords to direct experience. What does that mean? It means that the Buddha invites each individual to test its principle in the crucible of his or her own experience. So we can verify the teachings ourselves. How? By practice and always testing the teaching and then see it for ourselves. There's a famous term for this called ehipassiko. I will continue with the next paragraph. This does not mean that an ordinary person can fully validate the Buddha's doctrine by direct experience without special effort. Yeah, this one is worth highlighting. To the contrary, the teaching can only be fully realized through the achievement of certain extraordinary types of experience that are far beyond the range of the ordinary person enmeshed in the concerns of mundane life. However, in sharp contrast to revealed religion, the Buddha does not demand that we begin our spiritual quest by placing faith in doctrines that lie beyond the range of our immediate experience, rather than ask us to wrestle with issues that, for us in our present condition, no amount of experience can decide. He instead asks us to consider a few simple questions pertaining to our immediate welfare and happiness. Questions that we can answer on the basis of personal experience. I highlight the expression here, for us in our present conditions, because the fact that we cannot presently validate such matters does not constitute grounds for rejecting them as invalid or even as irrelevant. It only means that we should put them aside for now, for the time being, and concern ourselves with issues that come within the range of direct experience. So, for example, what kind of stuff that, let's say, this line, for us in our present condition, no amount of experience can decide. So, for example, this would be something like the realms other than the human realms and the animal realms. Yeah? Human realms we can see for ourselves. Animal realms we can see ourselves. But heavenly realms, can we see for ourselves? Probably not at this moment. And hell realm, also the ghost realms, can we see for ourselves? Probably not at this moment. And also the process of rebirth, can we see for ourselves? Probably not at this moment. But that doesn't mean here Bhikkhu Bodhi emphasizes that just because we can't see it, we should reject them, yeah, or regard them as invalid or as irrelevant. Yeah. Yeah. This means we should put them aside first and then try to tackle whatever concern or suffering that currently arises in our direct experience. Probably this is not an issue for us, but in the past, I do have a lot of doubts about all these things that cannot be verified according to my direct experience. But right now, my faith has increased so that I have faith in them as being valid, even though I can't verify it for myself for now. And I do see some friends having some problems with regards of all this. They regard this as a superstition, and that's why they reject the teaching just because they can't verify it. So that's about that's a little bit about this paragraph. Next paragraph, Sister Chai Kwan, would you like to read?
The Buddha says that his teaching is about suffering and the cessation of suffering. This statement does not mean that the Dhamma is concerned only with our experience of suffering in the present life, but it does imply that we can use our present experience backed by intelligent observation as a criterion for determining what is beneficial and what detrimental to our spiritual progress. Our most insistent existential demand, springing up deep within us, is the need for freedom from harm, sorrow, and distress, or positively stated, the need to achieve well-being and happiness. However, to avoid harm and to secure our well-being, it is not sufficient for us to merely to hope. We first have to understand the condition on which they depend. According to the Buddha, whatever arises, arises through appropriate causes and conditions, and this applies with equal force to suffering and happiness. Thus, we must ascertain the causes and conditions that lead to harm and suffering, and likewise, the causes and conditions that lead to well-being and happiness. Once we have extracted these two principles, the conditions leading to harm and suffering, and the conditions leading to well-being and happiness, we have at our disposal an outline of the entire process that leads to the ultimate goal, final liberation from suffering. Thank you.
Thanks, Sister Chai Kwan. Okay, this paragraph starts with that the Buddha says he's teaching about suffering and about the cessation of the suffering. Okay, so I like this line here. If we use our present experience backed by intelligent observation, we can determine what is beneficial and what is detrimental to our spiritual progress. What is the ground that we should start on here? Our most insistent existential demand, springing up deep within us. What is that? The need for freedom from harm, sorrow, or distress. Or, stated positively, the need to achieve well-being and happiness. This line is also quite interesting. To avoid harm and secure our being, it's not sufficient to really hope. Some people just buy every day. Actually, my parents, all they do mostly are praying and hoping that fortune will come to them, and without doing anything else. I think that's the issue. If you just pray and chant all day and not doing anything else to improve your welfare, that's pretty tough to achieve your well-being. So here, we first have to understand the conditions on which they depend. On which what depends? Our happiness and our suffering. Whatever arises through appropriate causes and conditions. And this applies to both suffering and happiness. Because happiness and suffering arises through conditions, then we should know what are the causes and the conditions that leads to suffering, and what are the causes and the conditions that lead to happiness. If we can determine that, then we know what to do to achieve the ultimate goal. Final liberation from suffering. Next paragraph is the second. Would you like to read?
One text offering an excellent example of this approach is a short discourse in the Anguttara Nikaya, popularly known as the Kalama Sutta, included as text 3.2. The Kalamas were a people living in a remote area of the Ganges plain. Various religious teachers would come to visit them, and each would extol his own doctrine and tear down the doctrines of his rivals. Confused and perplexed by this conflict of belief systems, the Kalamas did not know whom to trust. When the Buddha passed through their town, they approached him and asked him to clear away their doubts. Though the text does not specify what particular issues were troubling the Kalamas, the later part of the discourses makes it clear that their perplexities revolve around the questions of rebirth and karma.
Okay, thanks, Sister Sakyang. So Bhikkhu Bodhi give one example from the sutta called Kalama Sutta, where the Kalamas, a group of people living in some area of the Ganges plain, they're confused and perplexed because various religious teachers come and visit them, and then one is found A, the other is found B, the other is found C, and some even expounds negative A, negative B, negative C. So they're opposing each other, and then they're confused. Oh, so many stuff to learn. Then how? They ask the Buddha, how? How can we decide which one is true, which one is correct? Next one, Sister Aiki, would you like to read?
The Buddha began by assuring the Kalamas that under such circumstances, it was proper for them to doubt, for the issues that troubled them were indeed common sources of doubt and perplexity. He then told them not to rely on 10 sources of belief. 4 of these pertain to established scriptural authority, that's oral tradition, lineage of teaching, hearsay, and collections of texts. 4 to traditional grounds, that's logic, inferential reasoning, reason, cogitation, and the acceptance of a view after pondering it. And 2 to authoritative persons, as impressive speakers and respected teachers. This advice is sometimes quoted to prove that the Buddha rejected all external authorities and invited each individual to fashion his or her own personal path to the truth. Read in context, however, the message of the Kalama Sutta is quite different. The Buddha is not advising the Kalamas, who, it must be stressed, had at this point not yet become his own disciples, to reject all authoritative guides to spiritual understanding and fall back solely on their personal intuition. Rather, he's offering them a simple and pragmatic outlet from the morass of doubt and perplexity in which they are immersed. By the use of skillful methods of inquiry, he leads them to understand a number of basic principles that they can verify by their own experience and thereby acquire a sure starting point for further spiritual development.
Thank you. Let's take a look at footnotes number 1. Among the criteria he proposes is the opinion of the wise. which shows that far from rejecting the opinions of others, the Buddha includes the opinions of the right sort of person among the standards for determining proper conduct. Other suttas tell us how we can judge who is truly wise. See text chapter 3.4 and text chapter 3.5. Here, the Buddha begins by acknowledging the kalamas, that it is proper, it is common for them to have doubt, because the issues that trouble them were indeed common sources of doubt and perplexity. So the Buddha uses the common, currently the technique known as the sandwich feedback technique. So you started off with acknowledging the other person, and then at the middle you start to give the feedback. And the end you end with a positive note as well. So you sandwich your feedback in the middle of the a positive notes. Firstly, acknowledging them and end with the positive notes. Okay, this is the list of what not to rely on. And this one has 10s. So the first 4 is establish scriptural authority, oral tradition, lineage of teaching, hearsay, collections of texts. 4 to rational grounds, logic, inferential reasoning, reason, cogitation. Let's take a look at these words. The action of thinking deeply about something, contemplation. And the acceptance of a view after pondering it. And 2, to authoritative persons. Impressive speakers and respected teachers. Yeah. Just because the speakers are so impressive doesn't mean that whatever he says is true. This also applies especially to the current celebrities. Yeah. Some celebrity can say really dumb stuff and a lot of people are still cheering for them. So I have to be careful about this. Impressive speakers. Then if we cannot rely on this, then what should we rely on? So in the sutta, when we read the sutta, we will have more details. Yeah. But the Buddha guides the kalamas by asking a few questions to the kalamas and asking them what kind of actions will lead to wholesome results, and what kind of actions will lead to unwholesome results. Yeah, basically it's the 10 wholesome actions that we have read before in the Noble Eightfold Path, and also the opposite, the 10 unwholesome actions that will lead to suffering. Okay, I think we can read one more paragraph. Sister Shomi, would you like to read?
Sorry, always underlying the Buddha's questions and their replies is the tacit premise that people are primarily motivated to act by a concern for their own welfare and happiness. In asking this particular set of questions, the Buddha's purpose is to lead the kalamas to see that even when we suspend all concern with future lives, unwholesome mental states such as greed, hatred, delusion, and unwholesome actions such as killing and stealing eventually redound to one's own harm and suffering right here and now. Conversely, wholesome mental states and wholesome actions promote one's long-term welfare and happiness here and now. Once this much is seen, the immediately visible harmful consequences to which unwholesome mental states lead become a sufficient reason for abandoning them, while the visible benefits to which wholesome mental states lead become a sufficient motivation for cultivating them. then whether or not there is life after death, one has adequate reasons in the present life to abandon unwholesome mental states and cultivate wholesome mental states. If there is an afterlife, one's recompense is simply that much greater.
Thanks, Sister Shwami. This paragraph concludes the Kalama Sutta and how the Buddha leads the Kalamas to conclude that wholesome actions will lead to wholesome results and unwholesome actions will lead to suffering. And to add on, that one has adequate reasons in the present life, in this life, to abandon unwholesome mental states and cultivate wholesome mental states, regardless whether there is an afterlife or not. Yeah. If there is an afterlife, then whatever wholesome actions you do, the recompense, the compensation that you get is even greater. So this is the conclusions that the Buddha leads the Kalamas to achieve. Any questions or comments? If not, let's do a dedication. 愿消三障除烦恼，愿得智慧真明了。普愿罪障悉消除，世世常行菩萨道。阿弥陀佛。Till we meet again, may we be guided by the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a wholesome Thursday ahead. Thanks everyone for participating. I'll see you guys next time.